This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Hone, and today is Friday, and that means it's time for this 487th edition of MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. In today's video, we've got quite the powerful list as we'll be taking a look at the game's best 1-mana removal spells. Every single card on this list has 100 or more points, and the top 4 all have more than 300. The idea for this video came from a viewer, so thanks to Vive Canada for the idea. Removal is an important part of Magic. Control decks and combo decks need to be able to deal with threats so that they can reach the mid to late game and take the game over, and aggro decks need removal to get blockers out of the way so they can do damage as quickly as possible. 1-mana removal is particularly attractive to all of these kinds of decks, since you can often do more with your turn than just remove a creature if you're only paying a single mana to do so. You can even end up spending only 1 mana to kill something significantly more expensive, which feels really great. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be a form of removal that could deal with creatures, and it had to have a mana value of 1 mana. This could be a spell that exiles a creature, bounces a creature, damages a creature, gives it -X/-X, or outright destroys a creature. I excluded cards that were largely sideboard cards like the Elemental Blasts. I felt like those types of color hosers weren't capable of removing enough creatures in enough situations to be considered for this list. So in the end, there were over 250 cards eligible for this list, and in this video we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours and World Championships. And a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point, and this includes events like Grand Prix and Magic Online challenges. Alright, let's get to our list. At number 10, it is Chain Lightning. While it's often overshadowed by its big brother Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning is a powerful removal spell in its own right. Sure, it's not an instant, but 1 mana for 3 damage to any target is quite impressive, even at sorcery speed. It also has the additional interesting effect that your opponent can pay mana to cast their own Chain Lightning, but if they do that, you also get another chance to pay for it. And chances are good that if you're the one who played Chain Lightning, you're going to be able to take advantage of it, so your opponent doesn't usually want to copy it anyway. Many opponents don't even have red mana to begin with, so it tends to work out well. It was played at Magic's very first major competitive event, the 1994 World Championship, where it appeared in 2 different decks that finished in the top 8. It has also found significant success in Legacy, where it's been played in aggro and tempo decks like Burn, Zoo, Canadian Threshold, and Delver. It has also greatly benefited from Pauper becoming an officially sanctioned format because it's an incredibly powerful common, one that regularly appears in burn decks in that format. While it is still seeing some play, it does feel like Unholy Heat is destined to be on this list in the near future, and Chain Lightning is likely to be the card it overtakes first. At number 9, it is Lightning Axe. This 1-mana removal spell can do 5 damage for only a single mana, which is enough to kill most creatures. Now, you do have to discard a card when you cast it in order to get that great rate, otherwise you actually pay 6 mana, but the good news is there are lots of decks that can turn that discard into upside, and when you can do that, Lightning Axe is a pretty impressive removal spell. It found a little bit of success in Standard where it was paired with cards with madness like Fiery Temper, but it has been the most successful by far in Modern, where it can enable graveyard decks by putting a reanimation target or a card with Dredge in the graveyard, while simultaneously dealing with an opposing threat. It has also been used in Modern, Historic, and Pioneer Arclight Phoenix decks where it's a great fit because it's a cheap instant that can put the Phoenix in your graveyard before you reanimate it later in that very same turn. It's likely to continue to gain points. At number 8, it is Galvanic Blast, our 3rd consecutive red 1-mana removal spell. While it starts out as a worse version of Lightning Bolt since you pay 1 mana to do 2 damage to anything, if you get Metalcraft going, it is more powerful than Lightning Bolt, doing 4 damage to its target. There have been a lot of artifact-heavy decks over the years that have been able to use this at full power without too much trouble. The block and standard formats it was a part of had a ton of artifacts, with many decks having an artifact theme or sub-theme, so it saw play in a wide range of decks, including Grixis Control, Wolf Run Titan, and Red Deck Wins. It's been the most successful in Modern, where it's gained a ton of points in Affinity decks, and more recently, Urza decks. It's going to keep on gaining points, especially in Modern. At number 7, it is Magma Spray. This 1 mana instant lets you do 2 damage to a creature, and if that creature dies, it gets exiled. That last part is pretty important, since it shuts down creatures with death triggers while also stopping any sort of graveyard recursion in general. In a vacuum, Magma Spray is certainly the weakest card on this list, but it's been printed so many times and been a fixture in Standard so many times that it manages to make it anyway. In its heyday, it even saw some play in Modern. These days, there is actually the strictly better Flame Blessed Bolt, which can also hit Planeswalkers, and because of that, it's unlikely Magma Spray will ever see play again in any format unless it's reprinted in Standard again. Ultimately, it looks like it will fall off of this list. At number 6, it is Shock, yet another red 1 mana removal spell. It shouldn't be too surprising we're seeing so many of these on the list, as red really is the king of cheap removal. However, if you're tired of seeing them, I have good news: the top 5 of this list only contains 1 red spell. Anyway, Shock is pretty simple. It's 1 mana to do 2 damage to anything. While it's another card that pales in comparison to the iconic Lightning Bolt, it has been pretty successful in formats where the bolt isn't legal, and that's been a whole lot of Standard formats for a 20-year period between about 1998 and 2020. During that span, it was sort of the typical red 1 mana burn spell in Standard, and it was constantly reprinted. It has been reprinted as recently as 2020, and I don't think it's out of the question it gets another reprint in the future, which could allow it to stay on this list for a while, though cards with multi-format track records will ultimately overtake it, including Galvanic Blast, which is basically Shock with upside. At number 5, it is Fatal Push, the first non-red 1 mana removal spell we've seen. The push can always kill a card with a mana value of 2 or less, and if you can get Revolt going, which you can do by having a permanent leave the battlefield during your turn, it can take down creatures with a mana value of 4 or less. That is quite the deal, and it basically means you're always going to be breaking even or better on mana when you cast this removal spell. It isn't that hard to get Revolt going either, since something as simple as sacrificing a fetch land can turn it on. In a lot of formats, it is just capable of killing every single creature in the format that isn't a massive creature that's cheated into play, and that's really impressive. As a result, it has seen play in every format it's legal in, and is pretty close to being a staple in many of them. This is especially true in Modern, where you can expect to see at least 1 deck in the top 8 of basically every single event running some Fatal Pushes. That's what allows it to be number 5 on this list, despite being relatively new compared to many of the cards that are lower than it is on the list. It's going to keep putting up points at a pretty impressive clip, but that's also true of every single card in front of it, and the cards in front of it all have more than 300 points too, like our number 4, which is Path to Exile. For only a single white mana, Path to Exile can, well, exile a creature. Of course, the path does come with a downside, otherwise it would just be insane. Your opponent gets to search up a basic land and put it into play tapped, and yeah, potentially fixing your opponent's mana and ramping them at the same time can be a little dangerous, but it is often well worth it for efficiently dealing with any creature. You can also be careful to minimize the downside, like waiting until your opponent's turn to cast it so they don't get the land untapped right away. It's been played in every format it's ever been legal in, but like Fatal Push, it has done the most work in Modern, where it's a staple. One of the sweetest things you can do with it in Modern or Legacy is play it in a deck like Hate Bear or Death and Taxes, where you can get something like Aven Mindcensor or Leonin Arbiter in play, so that when you cast the path, your opponent isn't going to have a very easy time actually searching up the land, and in that type of deck, sometimes it has no downside. At number 3, it is Sword to Plowshares, which is basically Path to Exile's big brother. It is a card as old as the game of Magic itself, since it was originally printed in Alpha. It does the same thing as Path to Exile in terms of removal, but it has a less significant downside, since it simply lets your opponent gain life equal to the power of the creature you exile. And in fact, sometimes that can be upside, since you can use it on your own creature in a pinch if you really need the life, though it isn't used that way except in extreme emergencies. It has gained at least 1 point every single year since competitive Magic began in 1994, which is quite impressive. While it isn't legal in Modern, it gained a ton of points in the days of the extended format and still finds lots of success in Legacy and Vintage today, where it's effectively a staple. It's going to keep on seeing play, but it's unlikely it ever catches the 2 cards in front of it, which already have a lead and are seeing play at a similar rate, like the number 2 card, which is Dismember. Alright, so maybe I cheated a little bit on this one since it actually has a mana value of 3. However, it is very regularly cast for only a single mana thanks to the Phyrexian mana in its cost. Phyrexian mana lets you choose between paying 2 life or 1 colored mana for each Phyrexian mana symbol, and the most used mode on Dismember by far is casting it for only 1 and paying 4 life. That's quite the deal when you're going to give something -5/-5, enough to kill most creatures. One of the things that makes Dismember extra good is that the whole Phyrexian mana situation lets you play it in any deck, and a lot of its most frequent homes are decks in colors that normally don't have access to this type of spot removal, like mono blue or colorless decks. For example, in Modern it's played in Merfolk and Tron, 2 decks that would not have access to very much removal otherwise. Similarly, in Legacy and Vintage it shows up in largely colorless decks like Eldrazi Aggro and Mud. Even some decks that do have access to other black removal spells run Dismember though, such as Modern Death's Shadow, which likes that it can pay life for the spell because it makes Death's Shadow better. It is just a good removal spell all around, and that has allowed it to amass an impressive 365 points. However, even with a score this high, it's never going to catch the number 1 card on this list, one which you can probably guess since I have mentioned it several times in this video, and that is, of course, Lightning Bolt, which has 151 more points than Dismember. The Bolt is easily the best burn spell in the game, and I think this list shows you it should also be considered the best 1 mana removal spell in the entire game. You just can't beat 1 mana to do 3 damage to anything at instant speed. Near the bottom of this list we saw several powered down versions of the Bolt, and their very presence on this list shows you how good the Bolt is, when cards like Shock are also considered to be pretty darn good. Like Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt is as old as Magic itself, and it's gained at least 1 point every single year since competitive Magic began in 1994. It has a leg up on Swords though, because it's been reprinted a lot and it's legal in Modern. If you're playing Red in, well, just about any format where the Bolt is legal, you're probably packing a few Lightning Bolts, and that's not going to change anytime soon. It is likely to extend its lead over the cards behind it in the coming years. So, those are the 10 1-mana removal spells that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to efficiently deal with your opponent's threats, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card in this video. If you want to make sure to stay aware of future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to catch up on the almost 500 episodes of MTG Top 10 I've already done, you should see the playlist on your screen shortly. And lastly, if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, there are lots of ways you can. You can buy Need to Hone merch, you can become a patron, or you can become a YouTube member. You can find links to all of those things in the description. Thanks for watching.